In the previous session, we tried to understand what are the characteristics of the particles of matter, and in understanding so, we have utilized 5 experiments in explaining 2 characteristics of matter. One characteristic was particles of matter have space between them. That is one characteristic we understood. And the second characteristic we understood was particles of matter are continuously moving. Correct? So these are the 2 characteristics we understood. And now in this session, we will try to understand one more characteristic of matter. So before understanding that characteristic, we will confirm this through few examples that we hit 4 experiments that are left out from the previous session. So the first experiment here is, suppose you have a class strength of 40. Okay. What is the class strength? It is 40. And you made it into 4 groups. Group 1, Group 2, Group 3 and Group 4. And now the students in Group 1, there are 10, 10, 10 and 10 in each group. Now you are calling the first group and you are asking them to hold the hands from the back side. So, and you are holding the other guy beside you from his back and he is holding you from your back. Okay, like that you are forming a 10-member chain. So that is the first group. Okay, and then you are calling the second group. You are asking them to hold their hands like this, one by one, and you are making a 10-member chain. Okay, this was a different kind of chain from the back, and the second group formed a chain by holding their hands, and the third group are forming a chain just by touching your hands like this. So like this. So everyone are touching their hands just like this. Now what you are doing is you are letting the fourth group, okay, to break the 3 chains that are formed by those 3 groups. Now tell me in which case, the breakage of chain is more easy and more breakages will happen more easily in which of the following 3 chains. One, either from the back or just holding hands, or the third one just touching hands. So which will be a stronger chain? You tell me. And which will be a weaker chain? So may I say the group 3 that is formed by touching their hands is a very weaker chain because they are just very slightly attached to one another. The force between their hands, the strength by which they are holding their hands is not that strong. But whereas in the first case, they are holding so strongly, the force between one another, one standing beside the other is very strong. So because of that, it becomes very difficult for the fourth group to actually, break that particular chain because they have to put more amount of force to break the bond between these 2 children who are standing side by side. Do you understand the logic here? So similarly, in atoms also, there are different types of atoms and each atom will interact with the other atom to form certain substances, and these substances will vary with the amount of forces. One substance might have very strong force between the particles and the other substance might have very weak force between the particles of those substances. You understand this? Before we go ahead, I will talk about one more example, that is taking a chalk. Okay, I will take a chalk that is in my hand. Okay, and similarly a nail. Okay, it's an iron nail I'm taking, and the third one I'll take just a rubber band. Now if I ask you, out of all these 3, which can you break more easily? And which is very difficult to break? So you would say what? The iron nail would be difficult to break, whereas the chalk would be very easy to break. Can you tell me why is this like that? Why can't I break this iron nail just like the chalk that I broke just now? The reason is the particles that are present in iron are so strongly attracted by one another. Because of that, it becomes very difficult to break that nail. You understand? But whereas you see in this chalk, the particles in the chalk are very weakly attracted by one another. Because of that, I can break them by applying very little amount of force so that I can separate those two particles away from one another. You understand the reason? And one more example I would like to talk about here is, have you ever seen, okay, I have seen this, I have done this so many times. When I went to a pool, okay, and when some children are sitting beside me, small children, they start playing with their hands with water, correct? And they just try to pick some water and hold it onto their hand, correct? Now, here, do you know the reason why they are able to take water that is present in the pool to their hand and the water is still intact in their hand? Do you know the reason why? Here, water is made up of water particles and there is some force between every particle that is present in water. And the force is very weak. Because of that, the child who is actually sitting beside me is able to cut through that water and pick that water to his hand. And do you know the reason why this water that is present in his hand is still intact? Because there is a force of attraction between particle of water to the other particle of water. That is the reason the water is still intact in the child's hands. Do you understand the reason? And let's take one more example, and the child sitting here sees a diver who is actually diving into the pool, and he actually cuts through water. He actually gets into the water just like that. Do you know what would happen if this swimming pool is completely frozen and if he is trying to jump in? Do you think he can cut through that ice? No, right? But whereas he's cutting through that water, do you know the reason why he's able to cut through water but not through the frozen ice? Because the water that is present here has very weak force of attraction between particle to particle. But when this water is frozen, the attraction between the particle of water to the particle of water will increase, and they are so strong that the amount of force that the who is diving into the pool cannot spend enough amount of energy or spend enough amount of force to break that ice, which is really strong. You understand the logic here? So the diver can cut through water because the water has very less weak intermolecular force of attraction, that is intermolecular forces between particle to particle. Because of that, he's able to cut through the water very easily and separating the water. And the water that is separated are intact because there is the force that is attracting between particle of water to the other particle of water. Do you understand? So out of all the 4 experiments that we discussed, if you look, one is holding hands and the other one was cutting through this pool, cutting the water, the diver cutting the water through the pool, and the third one, a child playing and taking the water to his palms. And the fourth one, we have discussed about the nail, rubber band and the chalk, breaking the chalk. Out of all these 3, all these 4 could actually be explained by the attraction between the particle and particle. So this tells us that, the matter has these particles which are attracting one another, but they attract one another with different amount of force. One could attract weaker, one at medium pace, and the other could be very stronger. You understand? So this depends on the type of particles that are attracting one another. Okay? And thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next session.